I'm going to first establish that I have no makeup on, and I know that I don't look my best, but I want to be able to express my points on the forum and other stuff, address individual members, other stuff, um, just to have some closure with things. So first of all, I was treated extremely unfair on the forum. So out of personal dislike of myself, that for mostly for reasons that I have zero control over, I have zero control over being a social 4. I have zero control over having autism. You can argue that me having therapy would make some of my behavior more manageable, but you know what? I don't really want psychotherapy most kinds of psychotherapy when it's just going to deprive me of my childhood needs and it's just going to be me growing up as an adult without ever having had my childhood needs met. And I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in that. So let me start there. I've had immense trauma with applied behavioral analysis therapy, therapy in Cathedral Home for Children, and therapy with my parents getting all kinds of bullshit diagnoses on me that I don't even have. And just being slandered to therapists and other stuff. I have huge trauma with them. But even before, that happened, I was always frustrated that a therapist can never hug and comfort me and they just kind of watch me cry. I dislike it. I'm very open to primal therapy. Maybe I'd be open to some kinds of play therapy. The issue is accessibility, and I have wanted primal therapy since I've only been 17. Now that that's out of the way, I've been treated pretty unfairly, The forum is full of toxic people. Sure, I have my own qualities that are toxic as well. What do you expect? I'm in my 20s. I have autism, developmental delays. So that means I'm not my chronological age. And I just came from a very abusive environment from my family. And I have not cut contact with them, and I'm still financially dependent on them. I'm in a state home. I've moved 8 times in the past year, not anything to do with me having issues with the people, like me just being a problem, I aged out of a program, and that's when my instability started, when I had to get into contact with my parents again. All of my mental health went, and my life went up in shambles after, guess what? They came in my life. This oversharing of me, I was not doing this for the 5 months. No, I had longer than that I didn't have their contact because I taught the first, 3 months of Paula's. So for 8 months, I was stable. I had my issues, but I was not hemorrhaging like this. Then, I went in that horrible group home, not group home, I went in that horrible place, Eunice's house, dealt with the toilet situation, pooping and peeing in a bucket for over a month on the balcony. Then later on, Eunice invited her husband and it triggered my sexual assault trauma. And ever since then, and being bullied on the forum for how I was oversharing and dumping, ever since then, I've went worse and worse and worse. And I have mast cell activation syndrome, which means that I have mast cells attacking my brain and making it even harder to regulate my emotions. So, I've already gone over. Criminal Contract Boy I learned from, someone that he made the FBI get involved before. Now, I on my own realized that he was only site restricted. A very malicious individual who was doing bad enough things to get FBI called on for. I have a lifelong disability, and I got treated like trash. I was bullied for a long time. People said all kinds of nasty shit about me. That should never have even been allowed on the forum whatsoever. It is against the rules to have that kind of moderation discussion, even though I understand why Aster and Sama did it. They were pressured, their life was bitching, all of that, can't satisfy everyone. But you know what? That was not acceptable, how I was treated in that thread. And it just led to a lot of chaos and havoc. for Adam Strange to go at me, other people, a bunch of bullshit stuff about me, and that triggered my PTSD severely. So, sad thing about this is that typology is intended to make people have better relationships and to improve, and this website has not done that mostly for the individuals, and it's made them sicker and more toxic individuals. So, number one, let's just hash it out. I don't appreciate my treatment from so many people. Adam Strange, like, you have no idea what you are talking about with me. Me just wanting all this attention. I do want compassion and empathy for me, but like, you always like think that I'm just doing things for attention, and you probably won't even watch this video, but shame on you, Adam. Shame on you. And shame on you for your comment that you don't have empathy for adults. Fuck you. Like, I'm not even chronologically my age. I'm developmentally a teenager due to my autism. I'm in my 20s, and I haven't even cut off my abusive parents. I saw you excusing people who were older for me for not having it together, and that's not cool. North Star, do I really need to get in? He thinks I'm like the shitty person, and yet he, admitted to like beating up his brother growing up, like, and other stuff. Like, he was a kid, obviously, but like, it's still like he doesn't have room to talk, and I'm developmentally like a teenager because of my autism and developmental delays. That could be found in my regional center reports. I don't really want to put people on blast, but I am really disappointed in Echo because you know what? She works with trauma victims, and how I was treated by her, the whole push typing on me. Even like, for one thing, let me tell you why it bothers me to be typed that so much. First of all, I had even said before in Model G, I'm either IEI creative or IEE harmonizing. I really don't believe I'm an IEE anymore. But, it was not something that I was really that opposed to before. But the way that it was being done, it was like just pushing on me and trying to shoehorn me and use anything to like shoehorn me, insulting me for what was perceived as TI polar with memes and stuff. That's really not cool, and that's a very toxic use of typology. And I saw like FS92 do that. You did that to FS92, and you know what? Like, you got bothered when people typed you as EIE out of trauma responses, and that's really not cool that you have that. It's not cool. And me as an Enneagram 6 is a very bad thing. It's extremely bad. Like, I'm as image driven as you could get. I care a lot about how I am viewed. Outside of things that have to do with systems as well. Even I get reactive over how my appearance, other stuff. It's not anywhere from my head center. If you read Naranjo's Social 4, you'll see it's a spitting image of myself. The Brisa Hughson 4 as well. I'm a 4 in every school, unless you wanted to say maybe Enneagrammer, but even by that school, I have a low side of 1 and 2. Look up my Instagram from when I was a teenager. Kara's here to help you. That's the epitome of a low side of 2, and I had no knowledge of Enneagram when I had that account. So, with the whole forum report stuff, there were a lot of people involved in that process. And I'm not really going to out names, but, I had learned some very unpleasant things that I really wish that I did not have to know. I thought highly of Mu4 before. I was not expecting to learn some things that I did, and I was shocked when others uncovered stuff. I see the good in other people. It's not my nature to assume bad about other people. Even when Echo had thought Godslave was like attacking me, I said, no, he's not. I do not work like that. And that is another reason why I really do not believe that I'm an Enneagram 6 or a negativist in sociotics. It's just, those two things really don't fit, especially for somebody with CPTSD. I have severe PTSD. You know, a psychologist that I saw in February of this year said it was one of the most severe cases in her 30 years of clinical practice. Because I was just waking up 2 weeks nonstop, 2 to 7 times in the middle of the night after Eunice brought her husband in there. But it's just, you know, put yourself in my shoes here. I tried more than anyone on the forum to improve the forum. You know, when things were going poorly on the website, I had made a Discord to try and make people on there that they were attached to the forum. You know, I made a mental health resource thread. I did the forum reconciliation. I did so much, and then people just treated me like shit. And it was really uncalled for how I was treated by other people. You know, I'm not asking people to like me or anything, but how I was treated, their dislike of me causes them to treat me very poorly, and that is a problem. You know, making narratives that like I was like manipulating rules and stuff. First of all, I never even technically broke the rules, you know, from the forum one for my ban. I never went over the limit. Second of all, I was not making threads maliciously to avoid rules. If you had seen when I made threads, they were in innocent conversations with just onslaught of ideas that I had. I had even made those other threads to just include other people that didn't have pets and to warn. You know, they were just, they were not malicious conversations. They were not. And it was taken that way, and that's really bullshit. So there's a lot of stuff about the forum, and I told people this stuff, you know, that harassment drove most of the users away. People wanted to say I was making excuses for myself when they didn't know shit. I learned so much about the forum that I had no idea about, you know, with sexual stuff, with treatment of minors, with whole committing suicide and suicide stuff and other stuff. It was extremely appalling and horrible stuff. There were homicide confessions on plans, other stuff. It is extremely bad. And I'm surprised that maybe people reported the forum before, but nothing like they did for the FBI with Criminal Contract Boy, you know. But it's just this stuff has gone on for such a long time, and it's unacceptable. You know, this website was basically 4chan 2.0. And, you know, moderators telling users to commit suicide and other stuff in the past, and it's just unacceptable stuff. Very unacceptable stuff, and on a forum full of suicidal users. That website was a ticking time bomb for more suicides. Who knows if the forum had a rule under suicide? You know, it's blocked in by a login wall. It's really, 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 really bad stuff. And, you know, I was naive and idealistic. It's just like true. And I was treated really badly. People made a scapegoat out of me. They decided to distort my disability as malicious, manipulative, making excuses for myself. When it's how I am, you know. I even flooded, you know, the people taking care of me. You know, it's just how I am. My executive functioning is not that of an adult. And people don't grasp that. You know, I'm not even functioning chronologically at my age. For developmental delays, having been put up with intellectual disabilities, my childhood trauma and abuse. It's just really unfair. And people have inaccurate expectations of me. You know, I'm in a state home. I'm very traumatized. And, you know, I do want help, but psychotherapy frustrates me. It makes me feel like the therapist doesn't care about or value me. You know, I want genuine care. I want to be held. I want nurturance. I don't want to lose what I've been ungiven. I want primal therapy or maybe a form of play therapy, but not a therapy that just forces me to be functional without ever first having been given what I've been deprived of. I want my time to matter. It makes me feel worthless. And even if that's my issue, it doesn't change how I feel. It doesn't change that things are unfair to me and things happen to me that are not my own fault. Or that people treat me quite poorly. It's just really not fair stuff. You know, I've shown videos and stuff recently of some of my family dynamics. Being scapegoated, double standards. I have been in one show with my father calling me a worthless piece of shit and worthless. My sister making fun of my appearance. Other stuff. And you guys have no care or idea. You guys don't care about me. Which makes this video futile. But I just want people to see it. I know some people won't care. But it's not fair how I've been treated, and I'm deeply disturbed over it. And people should be ashamed of their own selves for how they treated me, made a scapegoat of me, for enabling harassment of me. I was suicidal from it. I had self-harmed over it, which is my problem, but I should have never been treated that way to begin with. I should have never been treated that way to begin with. I just don't appreciate everything with that. You know, in the forum, I had my place being there. You know, I met FS9 too, and maybe one day he and I will get married. You know, I might have met a future husband on that website. It's just really unfair how I've been treated. And people should be ashamed of their own selves. They made my disability, what's actually a disability, seem manipulative and excuse. But I can't help it. Do you guys realize that I have been raised to the highest level you could be for an adult family home? Because my executive functioning and spatial awareness and ability to self-monitor and organize is so poor. Do you guys have any idea? And they want to put me in a group home. I have this written about me in this casement. They want to put me in a group home if I cannot manage here. I tried getting free occupational therapy from a university around here because the regional center doesn't fund it. And my parents are unwilling to pay for it. And they have neglected me medically for a very long time. And some of the reason why I'm unstable now has to do with their neglect of myself. I showed a video of it. Like, people are just too hard on me. I haven't even caught contact with my abusive parents. You know, I'm financially dependent on them. You know, my mom admitted that, I've had these problems since I was a middle schooler and younger. I have had them since I've been younger, but she admitted the middle school. I've been severely neglected medically, and I have Ehlers-Danlos, like my sister who's, I have them diagnosed with hypermobility syndrome already. But, that predisposes issues, but their maltreatment of me resulted me to become very sick, was young in myself. Rheumatoid arthritis and other conditions.